Hi viewers, welcome back to Docker presentation series. This is Satyadev. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about Docker Compose. So till now I talked about individual Docker CLI commands, Docker, how the process works. Basically, I'm just reiterating again and again. You have a Docker file. You say Docker build. It creates an image, and you run that image. You get a Docker container. That's pretty much the process, right? Now, what is Docker Compose? And why, where it is used? Now, in real world, you don't have only one container, right? So for example, e-commerce application like Amazon or Flipkart or anything, they have a lot of things running, and most of the time they are all developed as independent pieces working together. In when it comes to technology, they are all implemented using microservices. Now, the way microservices are organized is it's just independent unit which contains its own DB, right? It has to be run independently. Now, how do you organize such kind of things? Like you, in that case, you have to run several Docker images. The reason you have to run Docker as separate Docker images is, again, take the e-commerce platform example. In the e-commerce platform example, certain features of the applications are used very, very frequently, like searching for a product, increment the count of the number of items, all those things, operations, login to the e-commerce platform or logging out, not many times, right? So one time you do it, and for a particular user, that is one thing. Second thing is, by ordering, right? So that's only last thing that you do. So when you see, and there are certain other things which you will do, complaint, you will do very, very less, right? So compared to the other things, or you want to comment, that also not so frequently, right? So there are, I mean, even though it's a single application, e-commerce platform is a single application, not all the aspects of the application are used very frequently. In that case, the way the architecture should work is, components that are used, they have to be more in number. The instances of those components have to be more in number. Components that are to be used less in number, that are used not so frequently, have to be less in number. The advantage is you use the memory, you're going to have control on the usage of the memory and resources, right? That's pretty much the advantage of microservices. Again, microservices, I might do a presentation series on that one. I haven't done yet. I'm planning to do it in the near future. But microservices are for that, right? So basically, right? In that context, it's not just like one thing. Like, multiple things have to be, images have to be created for each and every component, right? For each every component, you have to Docker build, Docker run, Docker build. It takes a lot of time. So I mean, the very old way of doing it is like a batch file thing, stuff like that, right? Now, to avoid that, the Docker Compose is there. It's like a batching of stuff. We will see more into what is Docker file and file structure and all that stuff in this presentation. Let's get into the first slide. Okay, so what is Docker Compose? Docker Compose is a tool specifically designed for defining and running multi-container. This is key, multi-container Docker application. It takes a single Docker compose.yaml file. The extension could be YAML or YML. I think nowadays everybody using YML, but you could type YAML also. It is also allowed. Basically, it's called YAML file. YAML file. It's a file. It's a text file basically, just like Docker file. Docker file doesn't have any extension. This has got YML extension. Declarative configuration file as an argument and creates and starts all the Docker container services, networks, environments, variables, volumes defined in that file. Now, if you don't have this concept of Docker file, you would be ending up typing a lot of commands at the command line interface. To reduce the burden on the command line interface and typing interface repeatedly, this Docker Compose file has been written. This tool avoids starting, stopping, connecting individual containers manually using Docker run command and for each container. So this, I think you understood the benefit of this Docker Compose command. Repeated things, can be compose as one file and it can be executed, right? That's pretty much the Docker compose file, right? So especially when you have multi containers, or single also you can use, but it's more useful when multi container. And it avoids CLI commands, right? So that's what it is. About Docker Compose, there are two different implementations of Docker Compose command available for usage. One is this form, Docker Compose. One form is the standalone Python tool that is shipped as part of the Docker desktop in the Docker version v1. So Docker desktop is the one actually when you install your local computer or wherever server, it is the Docker host, right? That's what it is, Docker desktop. The visual screen, the UI for the Docker host is the Docker desktop, nothing but the UI Docker host. The Docker desktop is nothing but the UI for the Docker host, right? So with version 1, it is provided as a Python tool. Docker Compose command implemented in this tool uses a hyphen in its name. Docker hyphen, right? Compose. As of now, this tool is considered obsolete and deprecated. So this is one. Still works. No harm if you use it, but this is not so recommended because it came up with it. April 2022. There is a newer version, plugin version of Go language that is integrated into CLI in Docker version v2. Available starting with April. Docker Compose command implemented in this plugin uses a space in its name. Docker space Compose instead of hyphen. I mean, it's like, I don't know. They could have said use the same name instead of them, but they don't. They want to keep that Python alive, so that's the reason they use this Docker Compose, I guess, because it's like typing two things for something, right? So Docker Compose, like that we have to use. Yeah, I mean that's what it is. But this is the latest way of doing things, right? That's pretty much what it is. So let's get into the stuff more. Now, as I explained, this is how the Docker run and Docker Compose works. Now, let's say you have an image. You want to create 3 containers for the same image. Some example, right? So you say Docker host. On the Docker host, you say so image, right? So Docker run, Docker run, Docker run. It will create container 1, container 2, container 3. So that means you have to type Docker run commands 3 times in the Docker host. Whereas with the Docker Compose, you specify all of them. You just say start. Then it will say it will automatically create all the 3 containers at one shot. Like I said, it's a batch file of things done. Right? It's pretty much what it is. That's the picture. Docker Compose is a YAML file. I mean, YAML file, the structure, how it is look like. But there are certain keywords that we have to remember in this YAML file. That's what I'm talking about, Docker file structure. A typical Docker file, which is Docker compose.yml, again the hyphen is there, has following keys that define in its structure. Version, this is optional. Specify the compose file format. You can just skip it. Service, it is required. So services is a tag in the YAML file which is required because this is the root level tag that actually has all the stuff that needs to be done in this, right? So for Docker things, the Docker creating Docker containers. Now defines different container services that make up the application. It has multiple custom service names, web, DB, Redis. We'll see all these things. And under each service name, several subkeys can be used. Now there are some predefined things which I'm talking about. Also, we can create our own names without just specifying, declaring anywhere. You can just directly use. So image is a predefined. All these things, green ones are predefined names. Image, specify the Docker image used for this service. Now you want to create 10 containers from one image. You specify image under image tag. You put the thing like image name. Build tells the compose to build image from the Docker file instead of the pulling from a pre-built one. So I mean we'll see how it will look. Ports, map ports between the host machine and the container. So whatever we give at the command line, it is actually providing the same thing. mounts directories and names into the content volumes. Environment depends upon specify the dependency between services, connect the services to specified networks, overrides the default CMN entry point of. Yeah, this is bit tricky, but yeah, this can do the entry point overriding and all the stuff. Defining the restart policy, no always five. This is also sometimes important about. So this is the services. So most of the stuff that we use for Docker running Docker containers is done in the services, but that's not enough, right? So you want to access something network wise, physical files wise and stuff like that, use network and volumes. Even though I said optional, most of the real world applications they use them, right? Define custom networks for services to connect to. If permitted, composes create default network. So network, and you create your own name and you specify some network. So it will bind everything into the network. So it's actually really works really well. I mean, you do little and it does a lot of stuff, right? That's volume. Defines named volumes that can be shared between services and persist data. So I mean, for basically for storing data permanently, right? That's what we'll see the example, right? Then we will see. It is typical structure of a file. Version, compose file version number, services. You see service one, then service one configuration, service two. See this is the tag, right? So this is how colon, version colon, services. In this service one, you can use tabs to separate the show the dependencies, right? Hierarchy, right? So configuration, volume, network, like this. This is the high level structure of a typical Docker compose file. Docker file is different, Docker compose file is different. Docker file is for just for one thing, right? So one to build one thing, whereas this is to build an image, one image. This is to create, to run the from the image, run the containers, right? That's pretty much what it is. Compose is for. Let's take an example. Version 3.8 optional in the recent versions. So I think I haven't seen much this tag in anywhere, but it is very optional in the recent versions. Web. So again, services is a keyword kind of thing, but web is not a keyword. This is something I just named it. Builds the image from the Docker file in the current directory. So that, but this name can be used as one thing like that. So build. So build means like dot. So, whatever that is there in the image, you take that. Ports, map 8000 to the host 8000. I think this is a bit confusing. First one you specify host, second one you specify the container, right? So container hop. I mean, if you want to use the same port, you can just specify the port's same number. Volume. Again, you have to expose that 5000 port in the Docker file, right? So you have to expose. This is the container in the image. In the image, this 5000 should be exposed. Then this compose file will map this to the 8000. Mapping is not done in the Docker file. It is done here. Volume. So this is the code. Mount current directory into the code into the container. Environment. You can set like environment variables and all. This is for runtime environment variables. Postgres URL. This is actually better compared to the hard coding stuff. Depending upon in the actual application. Depends upon. So this is minus db. So you see this, I'm using minus before everything, right? So this is important. In order to give values, create new stuff, you have to give minus or hyphen, like db, start db services before web. So yeah. So what is db? db here I'm specifying db here. So I said db, right? So so basically it says like web is depending upon db. Like, so you see the tabbing, right? So it's slightly inside. So that means like this web is depending upon db. So then you define db at high level, similar level of web. So image, this is the image. Volume, this is the directory. Environment, this is for the db environment. See user id, password and all that stuff. Ports optional. Again, you can do this. This is for DB Postgres, DB data. Again, this is volumes, right? This is how we specify Docker Compose file. I mean, if you look at it, contains a lot, but actually it's very simple. These are all for every service. I specify one thing. Like I said, I can have multiple images run through this Docker file also, right? So this guy has got one more. That also is possible, right? So that's what it is. Yeah, I think that's pretty much about Docker Compose. Unless, like I said, practically implement, it's difficult to grasp everything. But I finished my theory, then I will show the practical examples towards the end. So thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Like, share, comment, and subscribe VNR Digital Learning Resource YouTube channel.